the same level. So perception and reality have diverged, mostly as a result of the media trying to spin a story that's a negative story, frankly.
And, you know, from my perspective, we're perfectly on track with this model that applies to all technology, from cell phones to personal computers to, you know, if we were all carrying around the suitcases of the first cell phone, I think we'd be all agreeing that that technology would never work. So we're perfectly on track of headed towards that plateau of, you know, the model working for 3D, much like any other technology.
But I think to your point, to turn around the trough of disillusionment, whatever its source is, we have to change the perception. And I'm not too concerned, you know, I'm not really too concerned about it, but I'm concerned enough if studios start to pull back on their embrace of 3D, then I get concerned. So the way for us to work against that is to continue to have success stories, like we just had a pretty resounding one with the re-release of Lion King. And for, you know, Vince and I and our team to continue to do our job, which is to make it as easy and transparent and as good a business model as possible to transform your business, whatever that is, making movies or doing broadcast television, from 2D to 3D.
I think the assumption that you're getting in the press is that this trough is the end. And what I'm curious is, what do we have to make sure happens to make sure it isn't the end?
Well, it's not going to be the end. I mean, you're not going to put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. It's just a question of how long it takes for people to realize that it's a trough of perception, because the numbers don't track to that. You look at the numbers. I mean, sure, you've got movies that if a year and a half ago a 3D hit was making 75% of its money in 3D and 25% in 2D, or maybe 65-35, you're now down by 10 or 15% below that in 3D. Okay, fine. The 3D is being punished for its own success. We now have more 3D films in the market in parallel with each other than we've ever had before. And the theaters, frankly, aren't keeping up. We need to double down on the number of screens. So now you've got multiple 3D films in the market at the same time, cannibalizing business from each other and forcing some of those ticket sales to go to 2D screens. So you know, I think it's just a question of it being a growth pain and not a contraction. As long as people look at it in those terms, I think they'll see the truth.
All right, we can kill that slide out now. So for both of you, what do you think the industry is doing wrong with 3D that it needs to change?
Well, I think that some of the approaches that people are making really don't define the future of 3D well. You know, from our perspective, we're very much into the business model. If we were to start with Avatar, and 11 years ago, we were trying to create tools that would go on a Steadicam, they would go on a Technocrane, that they would be conducive to a filmmaker. And I think that, you know, the industry, as we assess it now, there's those of us that are really trying to push this forward in a really strong business model with integrated solutions to 2D, working with the SPN 3D, CBS, and others. I think we really need to start committing that the confidence level of the filmmaker, the director in a broadcast sporting event, they already have all the tools to do 3D right, but there's a sense that we create around them that diminishes their confidence for moving this forward. It's almost like they have to reinvent their craft. And the truth of the matter, and that's why there was a big slide on there between the myth and the truth of the matter is, you know, they're entertainment specialists. Jim's an entertainment specialist. He knows how to craft a film. What we need to do is support that with the right technology and the right tools moving forward. So I think there is kind of a challenge there right now to align ourselves with the best in the business and to give them the proper tools and the right business model for the people that are funding this to move it forward.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that, you know, my question back would be, who's the we and what are we doing wrong? We know what we can do better as hardware and production services providers to make the cameras easier to adopt, to make them lighter, faster, smarter, to get more additional people out of the loop that are required just in the service of 3D, so that it starts to look more like a 2D model. But if you say, what are broadcasters doing wrong? They're looking at it as, I've got to keep my 2D team that have been doing this for years together and not have them get, tipped over by this 3D thing. So I'll put a 3D production on the side of that. And of course that 3D production won't be in the good camera positions, it won't be the best operators that really know the sport, and it'll cost significantly more than just the 2D. I don't mean the 3D itself will cost more, but I mean you look at the total, now you're producing that event with an entire 2D production, 100% of what you spent before, and then maybe another 50, 75, 100% for a 3D production. Well, that's not a supportable business model. That makes no sense. The movie industry kind of intuitively didn't do that. We didn't set out to make a 2D and a 3D version of Avatar side by side. We set out to make a product, one production, one end result from a 3D camera system from which the 2D stream was derived downstream. And the 2D Blu-ray of Avatar is the highest selling Blu-ray in history. So the 2D version of the film was not compromised by deriving it from the 3D. Well, that's the business model that has to be done for broadcast. And the reason that I'm pushing broadcast so hard is because I think that a lot of the ills that are currently plaguing movies are going to get resolved when broadcast gets resolved. And if you want to give me 10 more seconds on that, it's like this. We were in a holding pattern for about 25 years where we were slowly progressing from black and white to color. And at first it was just the big movies, and then it was just, the movies that could afford it. And then there were still, in the early 60s, it was about 50-50. Then color TV came along, and in 1 year, every movie was in color, because they had to be. Because they had no library value if they didn't. So once broadcast moves aggressively to 3D, every movie will be in 3D. It's that simple. It's going to be the same thing.
I wrote a column that I know you guys read and reacted to, where I said I think that Hollywood might be doing this whole 3D thing backwards, going for comfort over impact if there's a choice to be made, and going for big spectacle films and eschewing intimate moments in films and dramas and things that I said that I thought Crazy Stupid Love might have been really good in 3D.
Yeah, you slam dunked two genius perceptions in one column. That's pretty great because taking them out of order. The idea that if you've got a big spectacular film that a studio is spending $150, $200 million on in terms of visual effects and action, explosions, big movie stars, big writers with a great script, big shot director, it's going to be great, whether it's in 2D or 3D. The delta between the movie in 2D and the movie in 3D is not that great. But you take a small, intimate drama, those same moments, a relatively modest film, and you see it in 2D versus 3D, big change. Suddenly you're there, you're in the room when it's happening, you feel an intimacy with the characters that you wouldn't feel. So for a relatively small cost, because there's no effects involved in that film, for a relatively small cost delta, you've had an enormous impact delta on the audience. And I think that's the thing that everybody's been missing. They're really thinking of this backwards.
I also think that people pop in 3D, and when actors figure that out, they're going to really like it. Is that what you see it also when you're looking at dailies, when you're looking at stuff you shot in 3D?
I remember showing Peter Chernin a scene, there was a scene between Sigourney and Sam Worthington in Avatar. It was a long scene, it was about a 3.5, 4-minute scene, and ultimately didn't make the cut of the movie. But it was a very powerful, dramatic scene. And there was not one visual effect in it, not one action moment, nothing. It was two people sitting at the breakfast table talking, and it was riveting. And his comment was, this is the future. This is the future of drama. And unfortunately, when you have a big action, visual effects extravaganza, it tends to eclipse those moments. But I know from the experience of working on just the sort of the straight dramatic scenes that got eclipsed within Avatar, that those are the scenes that I think gain the most from the 3D. Not the fast-cut action stuff with explosions of machine guns and weird creatures. Because those scenes are cool anyway.
And that translates to all the mediums. I really honestly believe that that 3D has the ability to extract more emotion, more character, that sense of an actor walking in a room where you just take a breath and you see them. You know, 3D has this incredible opportunity that conveys that sense of feeling. You know, to me, the athletes run faster. Their ability to, you know, when we saw this first on the basketball games, you know, they're within inches from the other player, but not fouling them. And immediately, the experts in basketball and the NBA were recognizing how much they saw with 3D, with the athleticism of the players and stuff. So, you know, I really call this the opportunity of 3D. We're stuck in this 2D mode of just sitting there. Will it equate to 2D? Will it be the same with a better enhanced viewing? These are really the opportunities of 3D, and it could be an emotional film as opposed to a special effects film. But across the board, 3D brings that to the viewer like no other medium that's out there.
I think your issue with comfort versus impact, you know, I think that we were so concerned early on that the viewing experience at a theatrical length might be off-putting by the end. But now we sort of find out that, you know, there's kind of well-executed 3D and there's bad 3D. Bad 3D is going to hurt your eyes in seconds, and good 3D is watchable for hours. And so, if I had Avatar to do over, the one thing I would change is I'd push the depth a little bit more, because we knew it was going to be a 2.5 to 3 hour movie, and there was no data on a film that long. So I took a slightly conservative path. I only pushed it here and there. My advice to myself going forward is to push it a little bit more. And as we're doing the conversion on Titanic, we're pushing it more. And I think that you know, you look at films that have played it totally safe, that are in 3D, but kind of in 3D in name only, and I don't want to name them. And you look at other films where the filmmaker has embraced it and said, this is going to be in 3D, my God. And now you can go too far, but usually, you know, if you have a crass execution, typically a low-budget horror film has always got something hanging off the screen in the viewer space for like 10 seconds, which you would never do editorially if it wasn't a 3D film. I think that's going too far. That's making a gimmick out of it and reminding you you're watching a 3D movie, as opposed to just letting the film open up and breathe a little deeper throughout its length in a natural and organic way.
I understand that you are not a fan of post-converted 3D.
I'm not a fan of post-conversion the following way. It's being shoehorned into a post-production process, and there's neither the time nor the money to do it right. And studios are making a decision between what they think of as an apples-to-apples comparison, such as it's going to cost me, they perceive, you know, $10 million additional to shoot the film, to author the film in 3D, inclusive of the visual effects, and it might cost me $8 million to convert it. So they say, well, I can save $2 million, I can be a hero. I can go back with my tail wagging to my superiors and show a $2 million savings. Or maybe it's a producer saying, you know what, that's the $2 million they told me to squeeze out of the budget. That's the place I'm going. So all of a sudden, you know, the director is being told that the movie has to be in 3D, has to be delivered in 3D, but you can't shoot it in 3D, or you can't afford to shoot it in 3D. Now, that to me is a complete misapplication of 3D, because you've just taken away all the creativity from the process of 3D that you could have at the stage of photography. You're trying to shoehorn it into post like it's a sound mix. And quite frankly, you could mix a movie in a month, but you can't convert it from 2D to 3D in a month. Because the thing that everybody's got to understand is when you've got a 2D picture, you have zero depth information from that moment of acquisition, of creation. It all has to be created later. And there's not some magic wand software that does it. It's a bunch of artists sitting at screens, I mean a bunch, like 150 or 200 artists, sitting at screens using their subjective judgment based on ideas like, well, this chair is in front of that chair, it therefore has to be closer. This figure is bigger than that figure, it therefore is, that character is probably closer. So it's a highly subjective process in creating the depth map. And I'm going through it right now in Titanic, so I understand the process very clearly. There's no magic wand, it's incredibly labor intensive, it's mind-numbing, you know, in terms of the detail, to get it the equivalent of 3D photography. So if I'm doing 3D photography on a given workday, I'm focusing on the actors, the staging, the lighting, all that. The 3D is the tiniest part of my focus, and usually only playing for the upside, meaning, hey, how can we do something cool here by, maybe increasing the IO a little bit or have something come across the foreground. So I'm actually authoring with 3D in mind, but it's not taking all my focus, as opposed to the conversion process where I'm sitting there for hours thinking only about the depth. Believe me, as a filmmaker, I would much rather shoot in 3D than try to convert one of my movies in 3D to get an equal outcome. Because that's the point that people aren't really thinking about here. It's not an equal outcome. The way it's being done is not 3D. It's 2.2D or 2.4D. And it's occasionally difficult to watch or confusing to the brain because the depth isn't correct. And it's being arbitrarily applied. Now, yes, as these artists get more talented and as they sort of build muscle, they'll be able to understand the depth cues that are in that 2D image and make that in 3D. So I'm not condemning it. I'm just saying that to get it equal, to get it apples to apples, we're spending $18 million in 1 year to convert Titanic. And I think we'll come out with something that's 90% of what you would have had if you'd shot the film in 3D. But that's not how it's being done. I also think, by the way, it's ultimately going to be a pretty moot argument because as more and more stuff is shot in 3D for broadcast, and tens of thousands of hours of programming are being shot every year, it's going to be a lot harder for studios and producers to say, this is too scary, it's too difficult, it's too fraught with danger, when there's thousands of cameras shooting 3D every single day.
But you said it's 2.2D, it's not really 3D, but people are being asked to pay the same price for that ticket, and they're starting to push back.
And they should. And you're starting to see on posters now, filmed in 3D versus in 3D. People are starting to make that distinction as a marketing hook. And I think that, it's caveat emptor. We're all good consumers, and as we learn more about the products that we buy or the experiences that we buy, we learn how to be more discriminating. And I hope the studios pay attention to that pushback.
Let's talk a little bit about the Cameron Pace Group, because I know that's what you guys are here to really talk about. And now, first of all, let me say that Jim, by joining officially, putting your name on a company with Vince, you have waded into one of the fiercest rivalries in the 3D world. You have Cameron Pace Group on one side and Reality Technica on the other. And both companies just seem to be sort of arming for battle. So I'm wondering, you're here in front of a packed room of luminaries, technologists, and press. What can you say about Cameron Pace Group that sets you aside from your competition, especially for Reality Technica?
I'll let Vince answer and then I'll answer.
Yeah, most of you that know the company and Jim and I's relationship towards the technology dates back about 11 years. So in one way you can say there's not much of a change, and in other ways you can say there's a tremendous change because the fact is we've run a relationship together where we put our heads down, we put the images up on the screen, and we let the public interpret our work and decide are we headed in the right direction. And I think, we could call it a battle, we could call it, colleagues in the industry, headed towards a common goal, and that's the adoption of 3D worldwide. But the real fact is we've been running a company together that really decides what are the technology barriers, how do we support the filmmaking process, how do we support the creative process, and we have some highly talented engineers and a chief technology officer that is bar none, in my opinion, a genius that allows us to kind of dictate the future and have them support the methods we're going to execute that future through being technology. So, from my perspective, we have a great company. I think we have some great images on the screen that makes the statement that this is a valid medium that you really should pay for at the end as a heightened entertainment experience. And from our perspective, to continue on that goal of solving the business model and not sacrificing one bit of that entertainment experience on the screen. And that's what I've known for the last 12 years working together.
Look, I think competition is good in the sense that it's good for producers, it's good for studios, it's good for broadcasters to have choices, and it keeps prices down, it keeps us innovating and so on. The thing is that Vince and I don't really compete against other companies. We compete against our own vision of what needs to happen next. because, you know, we're like backyard drag racers. You know, we build the car, then we race the car, and then, you know, we figure out why we didn't make the time that we wanted on that run, and we go back and we work on the engine some more. We're both kind of, you know, gearheads at heart, and we're shooters, and we're guys that like to work with cameras out in the field. And then we like to share what we've learned with other filmmakers and with broadcasters. Say, you guys can do it too. We're going to help you do it in whatever way possible. So we're constantly competing against, you know, basically kind of the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics, the limitations on what things weigh. And we're constantly trying to improve the technology, make the cameras smaller, lighter, easier to use, smarter in the sense that we're developing now what we call smart rig technology, which basically takes the convergence puller and the interocular guy out of the loop, so the camera now is making a lot of the key decisions. So now people that are used to a 2D production model can just pick it up and be making good 3D. You know, these sorts of things we think are critical, but again, you know, we're competing against ourselves and the limitations of the hardware.
Let me ask you about your business model. Do I understand correctly? You're not trying to sell your rigs, correct? You're in the lease and rental business. Why is that?
Well, we don't think buying a rig makes much sense, and here's why. I think I can make a pretty good argument for this. Our rigs are modular, and they allow us to constantly upgrade them. So they're in a constant state of upgrade. And I'm talking week by week. If you buy a rig, you're stuck in time at the moment you bought that rig. And 2 years later, just at the point that you're starting to feel, you know, really smart about the fact that you now have paid less than if you had leased it, your rig is 2 years obsolete. It's stuck in amber, and you're in the Stone Age. That's how fast this thing is moving. So I believe in a model where there's a company such as ours, more than one company, whatever it is, which are central points that take in all of the requirements from all of the client base out there. Say, oh, you want that, you want that, you want that. We'll incorporate that. We'll continuously upgrade as the camera manufacturers come out with a faster, lighter camera, whatever it is, better sensor, bigger sensor. You know, we incorporate that into the rigs. We do it at our expense. It's a horrific expense, but we're still running at a good margin. Then we turn around and make that an advantage to you. You're not going to get the same rig at the beginning of your film and at the end of your film. It's going to be constantly upgraded throughout that process. Individual players out there who are trying to make images, trying to make films, you can't compete with that. Where's your big R&D department? Where's your big software department? Where's your big machine shop? You know, where's all your CNC machines? Nobody can compete with that sort of thing. It has to be centralized. So to me, it doesn't make any damn sense to buy a rig and think you're going to be competitive in 3D for very long.
And I could give you a real-world kind of example of that. When working with ESPN 3D on X Games, we sat down for dinner with the creative, and they were talking about the Little League World Series coming up and the commitment to shooting that in 3D, but the director, having done it a number of times, was really concerned about the eye level of the players. He couldn't shoot this with over-the-shoulder equipment to capture that same intimacy with the players. And so we discussed changing one of the rigs out to a kind of a football-style rig, you know, where you can pick it up on your arm. You can really shoot the player's perspective of the sport. And you know, the fact that the event was 3 weeks away, and when we went back away from that meeting, CPG's team just went on this and built 3 of those rigs for the production, because the end goal for us is to raise that entertainment experience. It is not
20-pound beam splitter.
Exactly.
You should just 20-pound beam splitter rig that you can hold in your hand down here.
Exactly. A production-based model, something that's, you know, full comms to the operator, everything that you need to get the production done. But the fact was, we raised the entertainment value, and that is the difference between a sale and a relationship-based lease model. Because if I had approached them and said, look, if you buy it, I'll build it, that conversation would have ended on that dinner.
You recently named Evergreen Studios, I think, the first CPG certified production company. What does that mean?
The CPG certified is a way of creating a brand that's a quality assurance brand for the execution of 3D to the finished image. And you know, there are some other great brands out there that we recognize. you know, whether it's Dolby for sound, whether it's Realty for the projection in the theaters. We want to have a brand in the production workspace that says that things are being done right.
And CPG is really a slate to screen or shoot to broadcast solution provider. We're not in the business of just building a rig and moving on from there and seeing how many we could sell. So as part of that solution providing, you know, model for us, we're starting to now work with production companies that can become CPG certified by adopting that same model throughout their production. So it's not just looking at it from just a single purchase or lease. It's really looking at how can we adopt these methodologies to, you know, end up with a good 3D product to their clients. And Evergreen and the relationship with them is a real strong one in achieving that goal. Use what we have, what we've designed over these 11 years to create the best 3D that you possibly can for the project.
Let's go back and talk